All right. Well, we're live now with episode 116 of SIC Talks. My guest is Katherine Dee, and we were just talking about the foibles of live streaming on Substack. Katherine, or also known popularly as Kat as well. You're over in Chicago, right?
Yeah.
That's where I find you today.
Yeah.
Nice. The we are in the midst of a winter break right now, a temperature break that reminds me of Chicago a little bit. I've always found Chicago to be a very, very cold place. Are you acclimatized to the cold?
No, not at all. I grew up in South Florida.
Oh,
And then I
wow. Okay,
lived,
so
yeah. I mean, I've lived in New York, but spent the majority of my adult life in California and Texas.
yeah. So what?
So
So sorry to cut you off. What brought you to Chicago then?
my husband's job.
Okay, gotcha,
Yeah.
gotcha.
Uh,
How do you find it?
it's all right. The first few years I lived here, I traveled a lot and I really didn't. Um, I feel like I didn't get to know the city. And now we have a child and I'm pregnant with twins. So I
Oh, wow!
feel like,
Congratulations.
thank you. But I feel like it's gonna be it's gonna be a while until I can really get to know the city.
Got it. So you are a writer and an internet culture reporter, as well as a newsletterer on Substack. Um, I'm not sure when I became aware of you exactly, but you have come up a lot in conversation over the last few months, partially because of your back and forth with W. David Marks, former guest and friend of the pod, partially because of the piece in the New York Times, as well as through your own channels about um, the internet as the don't let me mess up the term.
As either fairyland or the astral plane. So as like an other
Fa-
world.
right, another world, right? That was the term I was searching for. And then also because you have been, I don't know, you pioneered exactly, but I think of you as w- like operator number one of a really interesting live stream call-in show operating through Substack, which I just think is a really cool. It's a great format hack / callback to the coast to coast AM, lines of our childhood. So anyway, I think you're doing some awesome stuff, Katherine.
Thank
So I
you.
thought I would ask you to be on the show and shoot the shit with me a little bit.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, I'm flattered. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, so what I was going to ask was like when you say it's going to be a while till you get to know Chicago in your like what would getting to know Chicago entail? Like at what point do you feel like you've gotten there? Is it when you've gotten into the nooks and crannies of subculture? Is it when you've visited all of the private detective shops in town? Is it when you've eaten every,
Well,
hot
I've
dog?
definitely the one thing actually I have done is I've tried a lot of different restaurants.
Okay.
Um, because I feel like especially right now, between the weather, we were just talking before we went live, it's like we're dropping in the negatives here right now. So between the weather and then having a toddler, I am a prolific Door Dasher, which is a little bit
Okay.
embarrassing, but it allows me to try. Like I've tried like every restaurant that will deliver to my house, so I feel very confident about the restaurant scene. And then whenever I get a free moment, and certainly like when my husband is free, we try a new restaurant. So restaurant scene in Chicago, I'm well
You feel like
acquainted
you're
with.
on top
Yeah,
of it? Yeah.
yeah, but I mean, I just like I feel like when I lived, I mean, like in Austin, I lived in Austin for a little while, and I feel like like I just like knew who to call for like anything I might need. It was like both like pragmatic and like kind of fun. I had a good sense of what subcultures were operating, what bars to go to. It's like kind of hard to quantify. It's like you just feel like you know a place.
Yeah.
Here, I feel like I know my own neighborhood pretty well. And I mean, that's it. I know my own neighborhood.
So, I mean, one of the reasons I ask is because I think with this exploration of fairyland, astral plane, otherworld that you've done in some of your writing, and a lot of what I imagine as a connection to let's call it occult theories or just the idea of disintermediated space time. Um, I would imagine you look for niches in like your daily life as well as in this kind of, professional life, cultural pursuit.
I do. I will say like it's much easier in Austin. To a lesser extent, in the Bay Area. The Bay Area has certainly has a lot of subcultures, but not necessarily subcultures I was drawn to. I mean, I encountered a lot of them, but I like occult and sort of fringe subcultures. And they have like rationalists and different types of tech people. But like the thing with like a cult, like the occult, is that you really need like a strong middle and working class. Like that's what
Talk about that.
attracts.
We'll
Yeah,
talk about
it's
that. What does
interesting.
that mean?
Like it doesn't the people who are actually practitioners tend to be like middle and working class people for some reason. And so that's why like Austin was so rich before the Californians moved in during
Right,
COVID.
sure.
I mean, it was already like pretty gentrified in the 2010s, but it got like turbo gentrified during COVID. There was a lot of eh, like wealth diversity, class diversity in Austin, and there was a very, very rich neo-pagan occult scene, of all different kinds, and for some reason, it doesn't really attract, um, like, high-income people, and I don't
That
think there's, like, a particular reason for that, but it's just something I've, like, noticed, and you tend to find, more active, robust scenes and the way I've often described it as like a place you don't need a reason to live. So like you grew up there, or maybe you
Sure.
lived in like a small town like 10 miles away, and like Corpus Christi is like that, Austin's like that, Dallas is like that, Chicago is like that. You don't need like you need a reason. Unfortunately for people who grew up in the Bay Area, but you need like like if you're not from the Bay Area, you need a reason to live there. You need a
Yeah, yeah,
reason
for
to
sure.
live in New York. You don't really need a reason to live in Chicago. You just live in Chicago or Texas,
Huh.
that's where you find more of these groups. And I don't really know. I don't know if it's actually like connected to class or if it's more like profession oriented. Um, but yeah, there was so much activity in Austin. I thought it was so interesting. Like you had psychic vampires, you had every flavor of neo paganism under the sun. There was Theosophists and the Gnostic Church, and there's like a sort of a similar vibe in Chicago too. Um, and like maybe the explanation is it's like people who their first priority isn't their career and maybe they're like
Sure.
a little bit bored with what the immediate environment has on offer. You tend to find also like more and this is just my experience, I'm sure it's not true of everywhere, but at least places I've lived, more niche hobbies too. The less kind of like uh, the fewer professional opportunities there are, and the fewer like status games in a way.
Sure.
Um, like it was very hard for me to find like covens, or like in another one is like rare instruments, like people who play like the hurdy-gurdy or something.
Right.
You don't really find that as
Sure.
much weirdly in puppeteers, in a place like New York. Puppeteers obviously being the exception for New York because you have so many, like Sesame Workshop and what
Right. You've
have
got
you. But
the entertainment industry.
yeah, but yeah, like the sort of like uh more, I don't know if it's like what you would call, they're not smaller cities necessarily, but like more diverse or something.
Sure.
Um, Less transplant heavy cities have more interesting subcultures.
Well, I mean, this theory of liminalism and the idea that the further away you are from a center of cultural gravity, the less bound by its rules you are. Certainly, probably takes effect there. But it's interesting because when you were talking about the class participation in particular, it made me think a little bit of or it made me wonder. I would pose this to you. It made me wonder about what we are now hearing about, like the Cauchy poly market kind of universe, where the the ticket to a a better life or a different life or a greater quality of life or whatever is through these means of you know, like hacking the cosmic algorithm, right? Figuring out how you take wisdom of a crowd and you put it together for your benefit. Do you feel like there's any of that, or is it something
Yeah,
else?
I mean, definitely with things like, manifestation,
Sure,
and, like, you also find, like, a lot more, like, new age so I would it's very similar, but I would say there's, like, a distinction between, like, the occult, neo-paganism, and the new age world. The new age world, I think you're more likely to find people who are a little bit more transactional, so they're trying to manifest,
sure,
whereas it's so much more of an identity when you say, like when you're, like, Wiccan, for example. Like, you might not be trying to use magic to, like, get something out of the universe, but when you're in these more, like, new age paths, crystals, things like this, like, I think there is this there you're it's a means to an end, and I would agree that, you probably find like a like richer like new age scenes where there's less emphasis on profession or less opportunities with profession as a way to like bootstrap yourself into a better life.
right. Is it your experience that people manage to achieve that incrementally or exponentially or somewhere in between?
It depends. Like I think a lot of these communities make people very happy and are very
Yeah,
fulfilling. Not always. I think it depends. I mean, like you, of course, you hear like horror stories, and there's cults,
of course.
and there's toxicity. There's also like people like spending money on things that like aren't really helping them. But like something I really like about occult groups is people will stay in that like will encounter a Wiccan coven, for example, in their early 20s, and they'll stay in it until they die, really. And it brings them a lot of fulfillment. Even if it is maybe like a type of performance or space to play. Like, I mean, I see it and also experience it as like as a religious faith, but I know that not everyone will appreciate it in that way. And I think no matter how you slice it, it does really bring something good to people's lives, gives them
Sure.
some meaning. I think it's a little bit more dangerous with some of the new age stuff. It depends on what um, what, strain you encounter and, like and what your goals are. Um,
Yeah.
I think, like,
Where was Oh, sorry, please finish that thought.
I was gonna say, like, I think, like, the manifestation stuff can get kinda dangerous, not, like, literally, like, dangerous, but dangerous in the sense where, like, you sorta lose sight of who you are because you're always asking, but, some of these,
Interesting.
groups and traditions that also have an emphasis on giving and relationships and imagination and creation, I think are much healthier.
Yeah. If you don't mind my asking, where was your sort of point of entry into this ecosystem as a participant, not so much as a observer or chronicler of the world?
Um, I was pretty young when I first encountered it. It my so I got a book by Brian Froud, who he designed the puppets for The Dark Crystal and Labyrinth. That's
Okay.
where most people are probably familiar with him. But he also has written and illustrated like many beautiful books about Celtic otherworlds.
Okay.
And um I thought that was it was sort of a way to introduce enchantment to my life. I received it as a like this one of his books as a gift. Um, and this was like the early 2000s. So the internet was kind of new, and like everything felt kind of like rare. So there was like this like challenge to then go find similar content and similar books. And I remember there was like a candle shop in the mall that felt like sort of like whimsy goth. And
Okay.
it all felt
And then this is in South Florida?
this is in South Florida, and it all
Okay.
felt like very like exotic and like difficult to access at I mean, I don't know, I was like 10. So it was like
I was gonna ask how old you were and how much this is like formative versus,
yeah.
you know.
I mean, I might have even been a little bit younger, like 8. I
Oh,
was I
wow.
was like just like tail end of elementary school, early middle school. Um But yeah, so it was like that and then, like, the radio and anime, like, they all felt like these sort of, like, interesting, like, difficult to access things, like, as a non-driving child, right, who only has the mall and
Right.
this really like sort of primitive version of the internet, and isn't like particularly literate, right? Because I was a kid.
Yeah, of
Um,
course.
so that it started there, and as I got older, and the internet became bigger, and then my mobility expanded. I was able to find like more things, and it just always stayed like interesting to me. Um, so it's kind of been on my radar for a while. There's just it. I think also as a child, it was like a way to like I really like enchant my immediate environment. Because there's this idea there could be spirits and the wires behind the TV, or like all I had to do is go outside and get like leaves and that make a potion or something, or
Right.
you know. So
And
and then
and
I
and
just
then by doing that, you could then exert some modicum of control over your environment or
I
make
think
something
for
happen.
I think for me it was less about control or like trying to become or get something, and more about like entering this other realm.
Sure.
I think it's the same reason that like teenagers who are in sort of like sterile suburban environments will like be drawn to psychedelics.
Sure.
It's like this portal into Narnia. I also really liked dolls. Like I liked all of these things that sort of allowed me to like enjoy where I was, but then add my own kind of flair to it in this like private kind of fun way. And
Yeah.
I built on them throughout my life, like with like my interest in dolls. Like I'm still a collector, but also like for a while in college, I haven't done this in like years and years and years. I would do like stop motion
Right.
set
Sure.
to like weird songs I had found on MySpace.
So sort of in Todd taking inspiration from early Todd Haynes.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. Okay. Gotcha. Um. Well, it's interesting because that sounds not dissimilar to play, just general sort of generic play, right? How does it? How did you? What distinguished it as being this otherworld adjacent experience as opposed to just young Catherine playing with dolls?
I mean, I don't think there is a difference, right? I
Okay,
think it's
sure,
a matter of like how do you appreciate how do you appreciate and view play? Um,
sure,
sort of like a cringy person to evoke, but I think this is maybe like the one like very smart thing he's had to offer, which is Jordan Peterson. Like I somehow like saw a clip of him on like TikTok like 2 or 3 years ago, where he was saying that like we don't have enough appreciation for play, and we're
right.
constantly trying to make excuses for why as adults we still play. And I thought that was actually really sharp. And there is something to that. And we don't need to like treat it as like sacred or anything, and forego our responsibilities as adults to play, but there's a time and a place for it, and it is really important no matter how old you are.
Yeah, no, I agree with you completely. I think part of the reason I'm asking about the otherworld adjacent sort of way of looking at the world or viewpoint is that having grown up as a skateboarder, one of the things that happens when you get into it is that you see the built world in a different way, right? Like a set of stairs is not something simply to escalate or de-escalate, descend, I guess is the better way to put it. We're not let's just generally de-escalate everything, right? But the, to descend, it is a piece of terrain that you can fly over, or that you can fly up, or that you can slide down, or whatever the case is. And you start to look at the world literally in a different way. And that then creates a sense of possibility about how everything can be used, shifted, turned 15 degrees, whatever the case is. And I wondered whether you experienced sort of a similar change in perspective by virtue of these, understanding of otherworldly
I think so. I mean, I think I
adjacency.
have less of an this isn't necessarily the setting I prefer, but I have like less of an allergy to like shopping centers or like artificial lakes, or like artificial downtowns, because it's when you're already sort of like prepared to see the world differently, or like you've had the experience of like um, you know, it, reimagining places with friends. It makes you it like sure, it would be like so much better to have like old like European architecture, be in nature or something, but also like you're not.
We don't have
It's
that
not
in
a
South
death sen
Florida.
it's not a death sentence, right, to be in this sort of,
Right,
like,
sure.
artificial terracotta downtown.
Sure. Well, it also it's interesting because it brings up to a certain degree this whole conversation that happens at the moment about people, Gen Z people in particular, trying to return to or practice some level of quote unquote boredom. In other words, not being constantly occupied by the screen in front of them or by the discourse or by whatever social expectations, but literally sitting in boredom as a means to steel yourself and to gain some fortitude. Um, I certainly experienced that without, not by choice. But I wonder, as a mother of young children and soon to be more young children, like, do you think at all about how your formative years are going to navigate and dealing with that are going to navigate how you or inform how you parent?
Well, I don't know. I mean, like, my taste, obviously, right, is gonna they
Of
in
course,
terms
well,
of,
of
like,
course.
which books I buy, like, my son has a lot of puppets that he really likes.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and some of them have been gifts, which has been cool. I think that's, like, a really interesting toy. I mean, and he's almost 2, so
Okay.
he's just entering this, like, phase of imaginative play. Um I don't know yet. It hasn't he's so young. And then, next I'll have infants, and the questions about, like, screen time and stuff haven't come up, like, practically. I tend to say that, like, I'm certainly not gonna, like, hand them an iPad.
Right, sure.
Um, Partially because I don't need to. Like, I have a lot I'm very, blessed that I have all this availability.
Sure. Got it.
And I can just hang out with them. Like, there's no sort of reason yet for me to, like, keep them occupied.
Right, sure.
Um, but, it's so easy for me to say that and say that I'm gonna try to be, like, if not screen free, like, like, screen discerning, but we're not there yet. So, like,
Yeah.
even if I did hand him, an iPad or something, he's too young to know. Like, he might there's I can't imagine what he would do with it. But who knows what
Well,
curveballs life will throw.
yeah, it's funny actually. I mean, it's like supposing you did, I think you'd be surprised at how quickly he intuitively picks up on what is happening and what his realm of possibility is with it. And I think that's part of where the panic around screens and young children comes from is this notion like young kids are so I have two I don't have two young kids, I have two older kids. Mine are 19 and 16. And but when they were little, it was remarkable how much they knew but couldn't express, and so when you gave them the means to express, you get it going. However, that's a little scary because 'cause you're like, "Fuck, look at all of this stuff that they already understand," right? I was
Yeah.
not prepared. I'm not prepared to have the talk with my two-year-old type situation. Um, but, yeah, what I'm curious about is I think, you are at an interesting age and, like, on the in the midst of a life stage change that is really intriguing and that people in our sphere of media and punditry write a lot about whether or not they know they're writing about it, meaning that like this whole discussion around generational attitudes or changes or differences or whatever, in my view, is less driven by generation and more driven by life stage. Like when you became a parent, things changed in a pretty major way that you never anticipated and probably didn't plan perfectly for, but you're getting through it and doing fine. And when you
Yeah.
come out the other side of it, you just are like, all right, cool. It's fine. It's manageable. Um, so I'm always curious to people who are in the pundit class, let's call it, and forgive me, that's meant as a compliment, not an epithet. Like to what extent you try to architect it yourself, and to what extent you try to just you sort of go with the flow and figure it out.
I mean, I think I go with the flow a lot. I mean, something I am, like, a little bit concerned about is, um, like, what happens when he's old enough to there's nothing in my own work that I'm, like, ashamed of or feel like would be inappropriate, but, like, I can be polarizing for reasons that are actually kind of unclear to me. And people say mean stuff. I'm like, what
Yeah,
happens
yeah,
when he
sure.
like Google's mom and there's like some, mean people saying BS about me. Like that's something I'm very concerned concerned about. And I'm like, should I tone it down or like pull back a little bit because
Or
uh
engage reputation.com to scrub your
yeah.
digital.
Like what I mean, will it matter? Does it
Right.
matter? So that's something that's sort of on my mind. I think I've sort of naturally become less concerned with some of the more like, minute stuff, like the little dramas that used to occupy me. Um, I still will engage time to time to like, I'm in this like really silly like Twitter beef right now, but like, who cares?
T-
Kind of
do you
low
mind
stakes. I just
broad
like,
broad broad strokes?
yeah, like I saw there was like a short film on my timeline and I said it was mean and the filmmakers are having a little crash out.
responded with mean
So
comments.
yeah, so we're just having a back and forth like, am I a woke scold for saying their film was mean, you know?
Are
So
you a woke? Do you feel like you're a woke scold?
no, no, certainly not. I mean, I don't think they should be free to broadcast this film however they like, provided that they have the proper release forms and whatever. It's everyone's consented to be in it, but that doesn't mean it's not a mean project.
Sure. Yeah, for sure.
It's- you do what you want, but I didn't like it.
It's funny, like you bring up Twitter beef. I was talking, your name came up in discussion in a sort of a salon, if you will, that W. David Marks put on in December, and he was talking about the discussion or the back and forth that you guys had around Labubu and that whole universe. And that was in, I don't know what, October that happened, something like that.
Something like that. It was a while ago.
So the reason I bring it up is not to rehash it, but rather to just say you also you're interesting to me because you live in an ecosystem within the Twitter sphere or within the media writer sphere that I have never participated in and don't penetrate to any great extent, but where there is that kind of back and forth and discourse. And David was speaking of you very highly, though you disagreed. It was like, this is what we should be doing. We should be going back and forth and doing that. Is that your general experience with those kinds of exchanges? Like, in other words, are you not happy per se to be in this beef, but like at least active, like happily participating?
Well, that's a good comparison because I feel like, with David, I felt like I was just he's very talented. I'm a huge fan of his. So I
Me
felt
too.
like I was just sort of offering my perspective, and it didn't feel like an argument necessarily. It just felt
Right.
like he thinks this, I think that. There's no right or wrong. It's just sharing ideas, which is very productive. Um, but some of the other stuff I get into is just like name calling, like this thing with the film, right? It's so silly and small, but like I mean, it's totally everyone's wasting their time. But something like with David, it's like that, he gives his readers a lot to think about. Um
Yeah.
and it's also like very respectful and it's about the topic at hand. It's not like it never devolves into like a personal attack or anything.
Right.
And I think in terms of what our actual discussion was about, like I I think I'm like prone to like coping, I guess, or like trying to make the best of a bad situation. Like it's not it kind of isn't ideal that like the cultural offerings we have on hand are Labubus and this treadmill of TikTok trends. Even if you can, of course, you can do creative things with it. I think there's been a lot of interesting new comedy that's emerged from
Sure.
from these forums. I mean, there's a whole laundry list of like really great, cool, entertaining, productive, whatever things that have emerged from our current cultural landscape. But that doesn't mean that nothing has been lost. And that doesn't mean that it's the best possible situation. And I think one of
Sure.
my flaws when I approach this conversation is I'm like I come off as an optimist, but it's actually a little bit of defeatism because I don't I it's instead of offering like a way to change, it's almost always here's how we can make the best of this. I
Sure.
think you can simultaneously say like something like Skibbity Toilet is actually this really interesting creative project, but also like we lost so much by losing a form like the novel.
Sure. 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 Um, what that actually it brings up a point I wanted to. Well, in a certain respect, it's the raison d'être of this show, right? Like, so this show is ostensibly a companion to my newsletter, SIC, that gets published on Wednesdays, and in which I'm sharing the links that are included in the newsletter, and my guest is potentially riffing on a few of those. But the real reason for it is because I am interested to know where interesting people get their information and inspiration. And you talking about TikTok trends and monitoring that stuff. I wonder, like, what are your go-to sources at the moment for I don't know. It doesn't have to be new stuff, but just stuff that engages and intrigues you and gets you thinking about this sort of thing.
Um, I've sort of been in a funk since like the fall.
Mm,
Um, but I spent lately, and again, speaking of things that are not ideal, this is not ideal. I've spent a lot of time on TikTok, and then also sort of like indulging stray thoughts and asking ChatGPT about them, which has
okay.
actually been like surprisingly generative in some ways. Like I read all this like gothic lit. Like I sort of just by chance got like advertised The Haunting on Hill House, which I had never read
I'm not
somehow.
familiar.
I um it's a horror novel. It's sort of like a late gothic book. And I was like, well, what's the like
Sorry, excuse me for interrupting. When you say Gothic, you mean literally Gothic period or Gothic style?
so like gothic lit starts sort of in the I'd say like mid 1800s.
Okay, so
And
literally
it
Gothic period then.
Yeah, and then but The Haunting on Hill House is much later. I think it was published in the 60s.
Oh,
But it's
okay,
sort of
gotcha.
in this lineage of they what ties Gothic lit together is that they have these like kind of like haunting themes. Like they're not necessarily there's not always a literal monster, but they have these themes like these like vampire lit, ghosts, and it deals with this sort of darker side of life.
And that all fits under Gothic as a sort
Right,
of
and so
a rubric. Okay.
there's different periods of Gothic literature. So you have, like, Southern Gothic sort of famously, but in any case, I listened to the audiobook actually, and I listened and it was really good, it was, like, a full cast, and it was awesome, and then I was like, "Well, what are, like, more books like this?" And I ended up getting into all of these different, uh, all these different books. Um, and, learning about, like, how, like, long this lineage is, like, I was really surprised by how scary and provocative, some books were. I'd never read Carmilla, and I read Carmilla recently and, The Monk, and it was just, like, really surprising 'cause I feel like I had this, like, very kinda, like, historically illiterate, like, stereotyped idea of, like, what was allowed, in, like, some older lit. So I've that's been my experience sort of lately, um, but, normally, when the weather allows and when, I'm in a better mood, I'll,
Right,
like,
sure.
go out and just sort of observe my immediate environment. Another thing that I always do, and I've done for a very long time, is I listen to old radio, mostly Coast to Coast AM, but you get reminded of things that, like, are, like, relevant today that people were talking about 20 years ago.
Sure.
Um
When you say old radio, where does old radio exist in that regard?
so you could, like, you have to pick a show, right?
Right. So
So
let's say Coast to Coast AM.
yeah, so you just I mean, people just repost to them as podcasts, and there's all these, like, libraries.
Oh, interesting. Okay, I didn't know
Yeah, and
that.
yeah, and you see this with, like, public access shows too, like, there's these small dedicated fan bases, and that's another way to, like, learn about interesting things, and, like, with Coast to Coast, it's not only, like, a reminder of, like, what were people actually saying and thinking during, like, the Iraq War, for example,
Sure.
but also, like, Art will mention, like books that he's reading, or like every now and then he'll play a song that a fan sent in. And that's also like an interesting way to expose yourself, not necessarily to new things, but things that you might have forgotten about or missed the first time.
Yeah. Have you engaged at all with MTV Rewind in the last couple of weeks?
No.
So MTV Rewind is this interesting project where a guy someplace, I don't know, haven't really read up on it on him enough, but he created an app that pulls from the YouTube API and this database of 33,000 music videos that would have aired on MTV in particular historical periods, or alternately on MTV program shows. So like Yo MTV Raps or 120 Minutes or Alt Nation or whatever, my three favorites, which is why I named those. But the thing that's interesting about it is that it does a reasonable job, because he pulls commercials too. It does a reasonable job of replicating the broadcast experience at the time, and re-engaging with that rhythm I found really intriguing. It's time out of place, or place out of time out of time, one of those. And so I wonder if your radio experience is sort of a similar thing. Like you pick up on
Yeah.
cadence and rhythms that are different.
Yeah, I think so. What's been most striking to me, especially for and I think this is very specific to Coast to Coast, because all media is like Coast to Coast now.
Yeah.
So you see how people have been concerned about the same things for so long. This
Right.
is like a little bit darker, but I was listening to a 2007 show the other day, and they're talking about school shootings, and they were talking about how they think they're not going to stop. They're going to get worse. It's not just going to be in schools. Um, they acknowledged that they sort of started in the workplace in the late 80s, early 90s.
Right. Going postal, so to speak.
Yeah. Um, and that and they went through all the reasons that we talk about today, and like how little that conversation has changed is like, I guess I kind of knew that already, but it's just striking to hear it.
Sure. Well, I mean, particularly in that instance, because it is so like objectively stupid the way that we allow those
Yeah.
conditions to arise, proliferate, to manifest and proliferate. Like it's insane. Um, yeah, interesting. I mean, I was never a coast to coast person, and the friends of mine that were into it, I said, had a tendency to at some point sort of spiral off into shit that I thought was a little counterproductive, let's say, right?
Yeah.
Like whatever that might be, engaging in conspiracy theories or heavy drug use, or just general like disentanglement with society. But I do think as a document and as a point in time, it's really important. Um, which brings me to a question for you, which is your live call-in show on Substack, which we alluded to at the very top of the show, is uh, certainly not a entirely novel or entirely unique product, but it is also like it scratches a very satisfying itch. And also, I'd imagine doing this, because I enjoy doing this, it must be fun.
Yeah.
Oh, why did you start doing that? What was the genesis of that project?
So I mean, it is a long road. So I had this podcast. Well, originally I had a kind of just like lifestyle podcast with a friend of mine who ended up, I think she has a very like demanding public job, and I don't think she like thought it out really. Like she can't do a podcast in that line of work. And so
Okay, got it.
she kind of like Irish exited the podcast, but whatever. I understood. She was in I'm a stay-at-home mom. In a different situation than she is. So I rebranded. I was like, okay, I'll do a podcast that's like a spin-off of what I write about. Um And I had my second co-host, a similar thing happened. She went into academia, and it's just like it's so difficult to get a job in that field. It's just too dicey to risk a podcast where you don't know what you're saying, whatever, right? And
Yeah.
then so finally I was like, all right, what if I like reformat the whole show? And then by the time I like figured out this sort of more like produced like audio documentary format. It was just like it's so much work. Like no one really had time to do it consistently. It was hard to find people who like, there's always people who are like down to do like or do something super time consuming for like one episode, and then it
Right.
kind of peters out. And also like we're unfortunately at a time where like people aren't really listening to things in the same way.
Mm.
They're
As they
watching.
did in COVID, you mean, or some
Yeah,
other time?
the
Okay.
podcast era is, either hibernating or over. We're in sort of a stream era, and I was like,
Okay,
"All
sure.
right, so I don't have the time to do this other version of it." It feels like this format's kinda dead, so I wanted to get on the video first, streaming kind of tip, but I'm not, like, I'm not great at, like, TikTok,
Sure.
and I don't have the type of charisma that's required really to be doing a produced video show. So I was like, this is in my comfort zone. I could still experiment with it. It's pretty low stakes. It's fun. I have enough of a community where it's like even if it doesn't grow beyond my community, it's always going to be interesting.
Sure.
And I'm paying homage to someone who I really love and who's in a format of work that I'm regularly engaging with every day anyway.
Sure.
So it's more of I would say like an exercise than like a serious professional operation. But that's how it came to be. Just a lot of bad luck and the market changing and my
Right.
time
Well,
changing.
or see in a different way, good luck and, you know, fortuitous happenstance because it led you to something that is differentiated and your own and also sustainable and fun and
Yeah,
additive
yeah.
and whatever,
I
right?
I like that. I like that framing a lot better.
Good. Well, that's what I'm here for. What have you taken away from? I mean, have you taken away anything from it in terms of interaction with your audiences or your community more widely in terms of things they want from you that you didn't expect them to, or that veins that struck a nerve or anything like that? Um,
I've gained a lot of interesting new people.
mm,
I think it's so personal and like cozy and kind of nostalgic. Um, and that it feels that way for me too, not just I'm sure not just the listeners. So there's been a lot of it's. I feel very connected to the regulars. A lot of people don't like it also. I've lost a lot of like of subscribers who just it's just not for them.
do you
I think it's
do you think? Sorry to cut you off. Do you think that's because of the messaging? In other words, the reminders of it and the feeling like, okay, if you want to be in this community, you have to participate. You know what I
no,
mean?
well, I
Like,
mean, yeah, I think people do actually have like Substack email fatigue, and that's an element of it. But
of
I also
course, yeah,
think like some people just don't like the more like parasocial element of it. It's not even like that the topics are a little bit more eccentric. I think it's just like and I also think my newsletter has become a little bit more personal in the
sure,
last 18 months or something. And my newsletter too has gone through many different iterations, but it was always very sort of like something you could skim. Um, like just a bunch of ideas pretty much. I would call it a thought digest. I just send it
sure.
out every now and then. And I think some people really want that. And then other people want something more parasocial. So it's sort of like an audience shift too.
Got it. Got it, got it. And so, that all being the case, returning to the question, is there anything in particular you've been surprised about? Like, people want, "I want more Wicca," or, "I want more, Chicago restaurant tips," or, "I want," you know what I mean? Like,
Um, I don't
how's
think
that
anything's
function?
been so surprising. I do think one thing that is surprising is people tend to call less when the topic is like really broad. But
Okay.
when I set it to something like really specific, we get a lot of calls. Like like something that to me would feel almost like, would limit. Um, but like, uh, so like something like
Is there an
deal.
example? You
Yeah, yeah, like something like deal with the devil, right? Will get like interpreted like very literally. And then, I always set these themes so you could interpret that in like a mundane kind of way, and then
sure?
also a paranormal way if you like.
Okay.
But it'll get interpreted very literally, and we'll get just more calls than we can take. But if I do it, if it's more general, um, and there's more ways to interpret it, and there's maybe not even there isn't even a literal interpretation of it. There's it's crickets. People don't like it.
Interesting. Interesting. Um, so I mean, going back then to the premise, the riches are in the niches or whatever, like metaphorically and literally. Um, that's fascinating. I funny, like the deal with the devil. That means then that the guy who is the Robert Johnson specialist calls in and goes, "Let me tell you what. Let me give you the latest on the Robert Johnson deal with the devil story type thing."
Just like very just I don't know, people interpret it very narrowly. We also had like a guy who was calling in a lot who like was into like remote viewing.
Oh,
So like
interesting. Okay,
yeah, and that was really surprising. Like I don't know where some of these people come from, but I love that caller. Um, and they have just like these very sort of like specific stories. We had one um there was one show where people had all these like really specific cult experiences, which was like surprising. And the other surprising thing is sometimes like people will call in with these like very detailed like niche stories, and they're people I know, but I don't recognize them on air. And I'll find
oh,
out later
interesting.
where it's like I like on the cult episode, we had someone who I'm like very familiar with, who's in my uh not even like really in my community, just sort of my Twitter ecosystem, who called in. And I was like really surprised that he had had this intense experience and that he was like willing to share it with me and that he felt it was like helpful to him to talk about it.
Sure, sure. Well, yeah, I mean, the extent to which these things serve as therapy for both participants and listeners is, I think, under discussed to some degree. But yeah, that doesn't surprise me. Well, I wanted to ask also how you got into writing. Did you start just kind of blogging and then that became a thing that you could do professionally also, or was there some more determined path?
Sort of. I always kind of wrote. I mean, I don't know if I'm like the best like essayist necessarily. I went to school for playwriting and screenwriting, so
Oh,
that's like
wow. Okay.
my like main medium. That's the medium I think I'm at least like talented enough to win awards in. So
Oh,
that's
I
my main
mean,
shtick.
which makes you pretty talented then, probably.
I'm okay, like low tier sort of whatever. Anyway, so that's what I'm trained in. Um, and then I did copywriting. I was in advertising. And I worked at different tech companies, and one of the tech companies I worked at, I ended up writing an article. Then I started getting invited on podcasts, and just wrote. I was invited to write more, and I think like my writing is really. I mean, it's like kind of embarrassing to look back at some of my really early stuff. And
It's
I just
true for
started to
all of
write.
us.
Yeah, I mean, I just started to write more, and it just kind of turned into what I do.
Got it. What was the article that you wrote that sort of set the boulder rolling?
It was about, dating apps, like, not really working,
Okay, got it.
which was, like,
Got it.
weird because I was, like actually, it was really weird that I wrote that. It was, 2019, and then
Why?
I was on dating apps, and then, like, like, very successfully. Like, I met someone. I didn't meet too many people either. I, like I basically, like, met one person, married them, and we're still married.
Right. Fantastic. All right.
Yeah.
But but dating apps don't work except for my experience.
Yeah.
It's like,
I don't know. It was just sort of like Twitter discourse at the time, and I like turned it into an article. Um, And yeah, I mean, I don't know if I actually even stand by it at this point, but
Were you first to the post on that one? I mean, was that why it caught hold, or was it the way you framed it in particular, do you think?
I think I was just like I was just early.
Okay.
I mean, I've been early to like a lot of conversations, and I think the reason behind that is if you just spend a lot of time on social media, like these are things people have been talking about for years, and there's always
Of
like a
course.
person who like announces it, right? But it's not necessarily like a new idea.
Sure.
And if you're like aggressive about being the person to announce it, you're always early.
Got it. And so you would describe yourself, is that still true? Is that do you describe yourself as being aggressive about wanting to
Not, you know, not in the
identify and announce
last
those things?
Not in the last, like, 6 months, and I've actually, like I feel bad, like, I have so many bigger fish to fry and things to worry about right now, but, like, something that actually really, like, I've been kicking myself is in April, like, I remember this so vividly, it was, like, a couple of days after my son's birthday party, kept seeing edits of this guy on TikTok, and it was clavicular, and
Okay.
he had, like, 10,000 or something TikTok followers, and I messaged him immediately, I was like, "Can I interview you?" And then I kinda, like, checked back in August, but I was like, "Ah, he's who is this guy? Who gives a fuck?" And I just, like and I just dropped the ball totally, and I could have been, like, first to the punch on that, but I wasn't.
Well, I mean,
Um
dubious distinction, but certainly from a reporter standpoint, that would have been
Right, but,
a feather in your hat. Yeah,
for what for the type of work I'm doing, which is just, like, identifying weird internet things, right? I
that's true.
but, yeah, I used to be, like, really aggro about, like, coining terms and, like, whatever, and, like, being the first to the first to publish something even though I'm not necessarily the first to say it,
Sure,
um,
of course.
but now I'm just like, "You know what? What is it? Who cares?"
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting, right? Like part of the whole push to touch grass, exist IRL, brick your phone, whatever, is to me an impulse to return to just a more natural rhythm, right? It doesn't mean that any of those bits of discovery or the subcultures involved or the personalities are any less important. It's just like, bro, we need less of this stuff so that we can more
Well, it's
we
also
can
what
meter
is
our
the
rhythm.
purpose of the subcultures? Because, like, I've always been interested and involved in different groups and communities. But I think, this has sort of been my line since I started, writing on this topic. The minute monetization or fame or outside attention is introduced, is is the death knell. I mean, there's certain types of outside attention that I think are fine, but I think when you start having people who are like jockeying to be the media ambassador for your subculture is dead.
Yeah, it's funny. We disagree on that a little bit because I think I would push, having been somebody who has existed largely on the commercial side of media ecosystems and in fact subcultures generally. I think there's a level of monetization, commercialism, whatever, that is not only necessary but good. It's
Yeah.
when you cross a threshold and when you lose the custodianship of the subculture to a sort of naked pursuit of monetization that
You,
it that
you
it
know,
becomes a problem.
I'll backpedal a little bit. I think there's certain types because like let's take something like the emo scene for example.
Sure.
Like when My Chemical Romance becomes like a big act, right? We lose the sort of house shows and that particular iteration of the emo music scene. But what we gain is a fandom, and it's a different community with different people. Um,
Right.
and the fandom could have only existed in the way it existed if My Chemical Romance signed to a label and became this huge act. So there, I think, like in certain ways, you're actually absolutely correct. Um, but I think there's like always like a nuclear. It depends on also, I guess, what the scene is too.
Yeah. Well, it's funny to use the house show. So I come from a straight edge hardcore scene in Syracuse. That w- it was small and self-contained and meant a lot and had a lot to do with people getting in vans and driving hundreds, thousands of miles to go sleep on somebody's basement floor. When that is sustainable to a point, but then
Yeah.
it becomes very selfish, I think, as a fan, as an audience member, to expect your favorites to continue to subject themselves to misery for your
Right.
benefit, right? And that's the other aspect to it too.
I think you're totally right. I think music's interesting because it like you either grow out of it or you it becomes more sustainable somehow, which is, quote unquote selling out. But I think you're actually right. It depends. I think different types of subcultures have different needs. And
Yeah,
the life cycle of different music subcultures, I think you're absolutely correct. But I think with like digital ones, actually, which is where my mind goes immediately.
of course.
Um, but digital ones, like that's where you see the breakdown a little bit more, where it's not you're not even necessarily relying on like I was talking earlier about how in my childhood anime felt rare and actually was like really good for like uh to become more popular. And now you can walk into any Barnes and Noble, right? And manga too, and pick up whatever manga you like, and it's not difficult to access. And the things that are high barrier to entry, like knowledge and like real fandom, I mean, still high barrier to entry. It's just
Yeah.
it's so much easier to get into it now. And it's up for debate whether it's better or worse, but in a lot of significant ways, it's better. But I think with like where you're not, it's not a fandom, it's not contingent on selling something. Um, it That's when I think the access that it becomes the access that you gain with monetization is a little bit dicier. So I think it depends. It's not a one size fits all thing. So I think
No,
you're right.
yeah, look, 100%. And to that end, all of these things need to be approached differently, and treated differently. It's like we can't apply a single cultural frame to any of them. Um, okay, as we wind down, I wanted to just also ask, because you have been first on many of these things historically, or let's say your radar is highly attuned. What are you paying attention to right now that like feels like it's bubbling? And I don't necessarily mean who's the next clavicular, because we don't need any more of those guys. But like, so like, is there anything that you're looking at? And you're going, wow, that's interesting.
I'm like kind of like hibernating. I think there's probably things that I don't even clock myself that I'm kind of paying attention to. I would say so I'm in a content winter, let's call it, and a
Okay.
literal literal winter too.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Of
but something I've
course.
noticed for like a couple of years that I think is really interesting is like as people's interest in politics and like the discourse and arguing seems to wind down, um, at least like politics as entertainment, politics as a sport to discuss online, not politics as it obviously we're all very concerned about politics as we live it. Um, just from purely from like an entertainment point of view, I've noticed like people are telling more stories. And like it feels like when you scroll
What do
like
you mean?
social
Wait, what does that mean? What do you mean by that?
so I mean it like literally like people are telling like ghost stories. Like I've seen like an uptick in like people telling like these like really short, sort of like scary
So,
stories.
so direct to camera, I'm going to tell you the story of the couple and the car and the bloody hook on TikTok,
Yeah,
and
like
that's going to be my. Oh, interesting. I'm
and many of them are
totally
fictional and like
unfamiliar.
and not there's a lot. It's really easy to get an audience with like these spooky stories, but I think there's different kinds. I would even say like the popularity of people reading Reddit posts out loud is a version of this. And I think like
This is
as
totally new to me. That's really interesting.
yeah, and like so I think like as the political environment becomes more fraught and how people are experiencing it physically, in their real lives, when they're looking for entertainment, like they do just want something that's a little bit lower stakes. And so like urban legends, um, Appalachian folklore seems very popular. Um,
Interesting.
yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Did you by any chance catch the piece in Vox yesterday called "A Very Simple Explanation for Why Politics is Broken," with
No.
the subhead being, or the lead being, entertainment got too good. Which I thought was, like, obviously is a dubious claim and dangerous, but also not untrue. And I had a conversation last night in which we debated this a little bit, and the one take on it was, well, but look at the entertainment industry, it's fucked. Clearly, entertainment isn't great. And my rejoinder to that was much more along your lines. It's like, yeah, but hold on a minute ago, we didn't have people reading, scary stories on TikTok. We didn't have Appalachian folklore. We didn't have all of these entertainments that have become not only salient but monetizable now in a way that people can sustain doing them. Um, and I wonder. So anyway, I guess two questions. One is, does that headline strike you as true or not? And then secondly, do you agree that the way that everything has become entertainment is a net positive or a net
I mean, it's a net negative. I
Okay.
think it's absolutely
Okay.
a net negative. Um, yeah, it certainly has not been good for politics. Um, but I mean, I think we're maybe coming out of it just because
Okay.
it just exhausted itself. And you kind of, like to go back to the clavicular example, like he's not right wing, but he's right coded, right?
Right. Sure.
So, but he's not actually like in the weeds discussing politics. Whereas, even like 2 years ago, the the you know whatever the equivalent of him 2 years ago would have been actually discussing politics, whether or not they were informed. And I think we're exiting that phase where it's like, are you left or right coded? I don't know if that's better or worse. And it's more tribal, but it's like it potentially less like just random misinformation.
Right.
Um,
Sure.
and the thirst is more for um entertainment that is entertainment, right? So whether you're kind of like parasocially, like, watching people go to the club and fumble, or you're listening to stories. Um, and I think like, what's funny is like, all these tech people saying like, oh, storytellers are back. I think they're actually right, but I think they're incidentally right. I think like actually like in the most like literal sense, like we're all kind of exhausted and we all kind of like long for structure and a ghost story with beginning, middle, and end that we can all talk about is like very
Feels
comforting right now.
very salient. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. All right. Well, speaking of ends, sadly, this discussion has come to an end. But Kat, it's such a pleasure to meet you and to get to know you a little bit. Thank you for joining me on TikToks.
Yeah. Thanks.
So your newsletter is default blog, right?
Yep.
Uh, where else should people find you?
You
Twitter,
could
Instagram,
just
TikTok,
find me
elsewhere.
default.blog, and that's everything you need.
All right, fantastic. I love that. Well, listen, everybody, thank you for tuning in. Catherine, thank you again for the time. And I have conversations like this every week. So at some point in the future, hopefully we can check back in and see how things are coming. In the meantime, good luck with the burgeoning family and with staying warm.
All right. Thanks. You too.
You bet. Bye, everybody.